Charlie Gasparino, thanks for joining us. You are a senior correspondent at the Fox Business Network. What does that mean? What is your job? What do you do?
I break a lot of chops. No, yeah, I do. I mean, that's what a journalist is supposed to do. We're in a sort of era where journalists take sides, and I don't take sides. And I do have semi-adversarial relationships with the people I cover. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, a Democrat, if you're rich or poor. If it's a story, I pursue it. Now, I think you do have to, it needs to be a check on yourself. I mean, you don't want to be adversaries to all powers that be. There are laws, there are libel laws out there where you can't publish false and malicious stuff. But, you know, being sort of in someone's face, I think is a good thing, as long as you're doing it in a nonpartisan way or a bipartisan way. And I think journalism right now, one of the problems with it, the reason why I think it's failing in some respects, particularly as a business, is that we've gotten away from our roots. You know, I know Carl Bernstein a lot. You know, he's a different character now than he was maybe back in the day. Carl was a great reporter. He was nonpartisan. He went after everybody. Yes, he made his bones bringing down Nixon with Bob Woodward, but they did all sorts of stories, and that's where we got to go back to. And I think I'm trying to be that way. You know, luckily I had some good mentors along the way, and I got to know him. I got to know, not really Woodward, but I got to know Bernstein and others, Jim Stewart, who works for the Times. And these were, you know, it was interesting. They were politically liberal, but they chased the story. You know, stories are not political. Stories are stories. I watched the Donald Trump debate last night. Donald Trump lost that debate. And I think you got to kind of call it as you see it. Why did he lose it? He's an undisciplined candidate. And I think we need more people that call it as they see it.
How'd you get into this business? Where were you when you were in college?
Well,
and how'd you get into journalism?
Just so you know, my father hated journalists. My old man was a construction worker. He was a huge Richard Nixon supporter. If you know anything about New York in the 70s, this was a time of protests, of rioting, of high inflation. The city almost went bankrupt. My old man was a construction worker. We actually worked on the Trade Center. He was what's known as a Wirelather. That blue-collar worker went sort of Republican around that time, a sort of reaction to the anti-war movement. And he really believed that the Washington Post, aforementioned Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, brought down Nixon, and he hated journalists for that. Now, it was weird because he hated journalists, but all we did was read newspapers in our house. My father didn't graduate from regular high school, went to a trade school. So he has essentially a 10th grade education, then went to trade school in New York called Samuel Gompers High School, which is named after a great labor leader. But he read everything. He read the Times, threw it in the garbage after he read it. He read the Daily News. The Daily News, when it was a paper, taught me how to read because I would read the sports pages. So I initially wanted to be a sports writer. I wanted, you know, in the sort of mode of Bill Gallo and Mike Lupica, who I read a lot when I was a kid. But, you know, I also had this sort of background where I was interested in politics and just world events, and I realized sports, to me, was too confining. And I was actually kind of good at understanding economic issues. And so I made a pact with my father. I said, okay, I'll become a business journalist, because at least, even though if I can't get a job at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, I can write press releases for IBM because I understand business a little bit. And he was like, fine. So I took a bunch of econ courses, and right about the time I graduated from University of Missouri was when business journalism took off in a way, not just like, you know, the stock market's up today. It became a sort of, it became part of the investigative reporting sort of ecosystem, and great journalists started coming. I started getting into the Wall Street Journal, and I made it my goal to get to either the Times, the Journal, or the Washington Post. And I got to the Wall Street Journal. I eventually was offered jobs by the Times, which I turned down, and the Washington Post, which I turned down. But that's essentially how I got there.
Why journalism, though? Because with your interest in economics and business, you could have worked for a bank. You could have gone and worked in the front office of the Yankees or the Knicks.
But probably I should have.
But you chose journalism. So what drew you to it?
I like being in the know. I mean, there is a sort of... it's a fun job. I mean, in many ways. Listen, there's a lot of cold cups of coffee. You're writing late at night. People are hanging up the phone on you. But chasing a story and breaking it, being the first person to get that sort of competitive instinct kind of kicked in. And that's kind of how I took my job. I want to break news. I want to be the first. I boxed when I was a kid. I was into sports. There was that competitive instinct that kicked in. And again, I think the business is getting away from that a little too much. I mean, how do we provide value as a journalist? I mean, do you just want to hear me bullshit on TV about nothing, about my views? No, when it really comes down to it, you want me to provide you with information that you don't get anyplace else that makes your life better. And, that to me is fulfilling. And that's what I try to do. I try to do it here. I try to do my post columns. I try to do my books. And I think the business has gotten away from that so much. It's so much posturing and opinion. Listen, we all have opinions. They're good. There's the opinion part. But if this business is going to survive, we literally have to add value. There has to be a value-added part, and that's what I try to do.
You have a great line in your new book, Go Woke, Go Broke, which I'm enjoying. It's right at the front in the introduction, and you write about journalism, about writing. This is about books, but I think you mean it about journalism more broadly. You write, you don't do this simply for the money. You do this because in your heart, you really want to tell a story about something important. Is that what you're trying to do every day?
Yes. And you do it partially for the money because you have to pay the rent. Remember that, to kids out there. You don't work for free. But it's not purely for the money. I could have gone into investment banking many times in my career. I have the equivalent of a minor in econ. I understand markets. I can explain the yield curve backwards and forwards. I've read books about swaps and complex economic issues, so I can work for Goldman Sachs if I wanted to. I chose to do this, and I chose to do this because I'd rather keep tabs on Goldman Sachs, to be honest with you, than work there. And I do that in this book, by the way. And I think, again, you don't do it purely for the money because there's other jobs particularly if you're good at this. I mean, people forget, if you're good at this is a hard job. I mean, you can do a lot of different things. If you can write clearly, if you can think conceptually, if you're nonpartisan, if you play it fair, if you try to advance the ball every day, if you try to add value, that's what every employer wants. Okay, so I can do something else. And trust me, I turned down a lot of jobs to stay here. And you, as a kid, if you learn these skills, you can do a lot of different jobs. But you got to want to do this. And I do this because telling a story, particularly a story like this, which I think is important, about how capitalism has been corrupted by ideology, woke ideology, is maybe one of the more important things that we can do right now.
There's a favorable review of this book in the Wall Street Journal from just the other day. And the very first line, the reviewer calls you a gladiatorial journalist. Is that what you are, and what does that mean?
I think it means that it basically gets back to what I said earlier. I'm nonpartisan, and I'm willing to take it to the mat. If I see something is wrong, that doesn't mean I'm going to violate the law. I mean, remember, there are laws out there. You can't just print anything on anybody, right? I'm scrupulously fair when it comes to my subjects that I cover. I run everything by everybody. I think that's a key thing. You need to be fair. I mean, objectivity really is a sort of obtuse concept, right? It's fairness that you have to strive for. You can't be purely objective. Purely objective is how the press covered Joe McCarthy back in the day, right? Joe McCarthy says X, Y, and Z is a communist. Not good. That's purely objective. You're just covering exactly what he said. The fairness comes in when you say, oh, Joe McCarthy said this, but he has no evidence of it. And I think that's where I come in. I try to be fair. But when I see something that's wrong, And I think woke capitalism is horribly wrong. I don't think people need to be indoctrinated when they go to work. I don't think companies should be taking political sides. I don't think that the cultural change that the left wants to sort of impose on average Americans, it's one thing for a political movement to do that. It's another thing for corporations to use shareholder money to do that, to become an arm in that fight. I think that's a great story, first off, because no one's covering it but me and a few others. And number two, it's horrible that they're doing this. And I give everybody a chance to comment on this. Talk me out of it. You know, I went to Goldman Sachs. Talk me out of what I'm writing about to you. I went to Black Lives Matter. They did not return my calls for comment, you should know. I went to the Center for American Progress. Talk me out of it. We had a long conversation. They were one of the sort of leftist activist groups that are imposing woke capitalism. I went to the Human Rights Campaign. Again, you see their name a lot now with the DEI mandates. They did not comment. But I went to everybody. Talk me out of my thesis. I think that's how you play this. That's how you protect yourself. But that's how you make a richer story. I'm telling you, when you talk to the other side, again, you can be in someone's face. This is a great story. And no one was going to talk me out of the broad story of woke capitalism being bad. It is what it is. I mean, you know it, I know it. But, give me your side of the story. It makes it a richer story. And that book is better because I spoke with Goldman Sachs.
How do you pursue a story like this where you're breaking news, you're providing information, but you're also offering an opinion, your point of view?
Every book has a POV. Okay, so there's different types of journalism, and I do them all. There's the straight news story. You just cover it. Again, fairly. You want to break the story first. I do a ton of them. I have a producer who I work with, Ellie Terrett, who is probably the best reporter right now in crypto, and I'm teaching her those skills. There's two different things here. There's your opinion. There's your straight news reporting. Let's get the straight news reporting down before you start veering into opinion, and try not to let the opinion seep into your straight news reporting. Then there are columns. I write those too. I think for journalists, particularly starting out, I think you really do have to master the art of writing straight news, like understanding the who, what, why, when, where, breaking stuff, trying to be fair, scrupulously fair, getting both sides of the story. As you get on in your career, you delve into other types of journalists. I wrote a lot of page one stories at the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal in the past, it's a different paper now, by the way. In the past, there were essentially 3 stories on the front page. They were known as leaders. One over here, one over here, one in the middle. The middle was called an A-head, as I recall, and it was an offbeat story. But the ones on the side were investigative stories. And in order to write those ones on the side, you had to develop into a reporter first, which is what I did there. And you had to learn how to write narratively. Even those stories, they were not opinion. They were, POVs, but not opinion. I think the opinion stuff, comes later in your career when you kind of mastered the different types of straight news reporting, narrative reporting, and then later when you get on in your career, write a book where you can really present your opinion in POV.
I want to ask about television in just a moment, but I like what you said about print and writing as a kind of building block for everything. And you started out in print, and you have remained in print. Now, in our digital age, you write for the New York Post, you write books. Why are you still in print?
Never given up my day job. It's funny you mentioned that. So when I was at the University of Missouri, which is a very good journalism school, right, I initially wanted to go for TV. And I was there, and it was like, it just wasn't for me. I wanted to chase stories. It was much more reading scripts and, developing your voice. And I just didn't have the patience for it. And so then I went and I dropped out of the broadcast component. I went into print, where they actually had a real newspaper there. And I stayed in print all these years. I mean, I found my calling, so to speak, in life. I got a job eventually at New York Newsday, which is the place I've always wanted to work. I interned there when I was a kid, and it was just this great experience. And it closed down, actually, like right when I was there. They folded the newspaper, and then I went to the Journal. But when I was at the Journal, I started doing TV every now and then. Like, they wanted me on TV. And I realized that there is this thing called confluence, that people talk about a lot. It sounds esoteric, but it's really not. What is the journalist of the future? What is that person? What type of skills does that person have to be to provide value to the average person? And some of that is being able to write it coherently and fairly. The other part of it is being able to present it in different mediums. And one medium, obviously, is TV, and one medium is radio. Right now, it's the web. It's YouTube. You have to be conversant in all these things, and that's kind of where I took my career. So I was breaking so much news when I was at the Wall Street Journal. So we're talking, when did I really get into it? Around 2001, 2002, right after 9/11, we're on the anniversary. CNBC had some deal with the Wall Street Journal where if you broke a story, you went right on the camera and you started talking about it. And it was right around 9/11 back then where I was covering Wall Street rebuilding from the terrorist attacks, where I started doing a ton of CNBC. And then as I started breaking more stories, I did some crazy stuff back then. It was Martha Stewart's insider trading scandal, if you remember that, going back in time. I broke a ton of stories on that. And this was all sort of red meat for TV audiences. And I became kind of a fixture on CNBC. I left the Journal in 2005 for a really good job, at least I thought it was, at Newsweek. Now, if you know anything about Newsweek back in the day, it's a different thing right now. It was this sort of, it was in, everybody read it. It was in doctors' offices. I remember, never forget, I finally had an office. I got paid a ton of money. What I thought was a ton of money, it's not now, but just bear with me here. They used to give you, on production night, they had their own restaurant. This was like regal. The Wall Street Journal, we were all in cubbies and everything, toiling away. And then I noticed something. Every sort of week, the news hole got smaller. The magazine was downsizing. It was becoming irrelevant. And I remember I was talking to Jonathan Alter, who was a famous, some would say, left-wing journalist, a friend of mine. And I said, I think we're going out of business. He goes, no way. They're never going to. Washington. It was owned by the Washington Post, by the way. I just talked to Graham, Bob Graham Jr. They're fully committed. I said, I don't know. The news hole is sinking. Who reads this? I don't know anybody that reads this anymore. And so I left, and I got a job at CNBC, which wanted me to break news on Wall Street. And I still kept my foot in the journalism door. I was still writing for Newsweek, basically, on their web. And I realized that you had to do both, because this business is so up in the air, and I quite frankly, I like to write. And Newsweek did basically almost go out of business within a few years. It was bought, sold. The Washington Post had to sell itself. It was, I think they sold it to Tina Brown, and she was doing stuff with the Daily Beast, and I actually worked for her doing that as a freelance writer. But the business, I saw it change, and the sort of magazine world was morphing, was imploding. I saw what was coming to newspapers, which was shrinking. By the way, people don't read newspapers anymore. And so then I went into broadcast journalism, first CNBC, and where I broke a lot of stories during the financial crisis. And then Roger Ailes called me up and offered me a job, and I took it. And again, I didn't give up journalism because I was never, I was skeptical about TV long term. And I think I called it right, because right now there is a sort of implosion of TV right now. It's called cord cutting. And it's shrinking budgets, and it's changing the dynamic of everybody's balance sheet, where even TV journalism is now on the ropes. It's almost like Newsweek was back in 2005, where people were like, oh, it's never going anywhere. But you could see the signs. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go away. It's going to morph into something different.
So what career advice do you have for a young person who's thinking about a career in journalism or the media? Should you go into print? Should you leap right into television? Should you look for the next thing? What do you suggest to a young person who's just eyeing this as a future?
It's a tough business. Go in with your eyes wide open. I can't tell you, what the delivery mode's going to be in 5 years. we all could be working for YouTube. I mean, in a sense, it could be something like that. I do know this. I do know people will pay for information that helps them live their lives. Whether it's financial information, medical information, scientific information, just information about crime. If you break news, give people something different, and you can communicate it written through your orally, you will add value. You will get a job. Okay, and when this thing settles out, and I don't, it's still. Trust me, I think we're in the 5th inning of whatever this is, how it's going to be. When this thing settles out, you will have a job, and you'll have a job during that sort of transformational period of time.
So you do recommend television? Do you have to get proficient at being on TV? Can you stay in print exclusively? What do you suggest?
I think you should do both. I mean, every kid that I call them kids because I'm old, but everybody that works for me. I try to get them to write coherently, fairly, but also to, we do stuff, we do Twitter Lives where they interview me to get their TV voice and to be presented. No, look how they, essentially to work on how they look on TV and how they present themselves. And I think, you have to be proficient in all those things.
What's the role of a free press in American society? Why is this important? Is it beyond just giving people information? Why does it matter?
It matters because politicians, business people, have a vested interest in lying to you. Okay, because they have a goal. Their goal, politicians' goal is to get elected. Business people is to sell you something, even though it might not be the greatest product in the world, and they don't play it fair. So there needs to be somebody out there. That's what's great about the First Amendment. We have a mechanism to check balance, to put a check on power. That's what the First Amendment's all about. Check on power. The founders were incredibly skeptical, as you know, of power being accumulated in one place or another. It's the reason why, the president, proposes stuff, Congress needs to pass it, the Supreme Court rules on whether it's legal, essentially, or constitutional. That system, plus a free press, is a further check on the accumulation of power. The problem right now in journalism is that we've stopped being that check. And I think it's irony, but I think it's a root cause of the reason why this business is failing. Again, you could blame it on cord cutting, you could blame it on people not reading newspapers, but key to I think a huge part of this sort of implosion of our business is that people are losing confidence in what comes out of their television or what they're reading, that it's biased, that it's, the journalist is playing favorites, that they're not adding real value, they're adding opinion way too much. I mean, there is an opinion page. It's here. I remember when I was at the Journal, I'm friends with everybody on the Journal editorial page, right? Good people. Paul Gigot, hires me occasionally to do a book review. This is a relationship I had when I was a straight news reporter. They once asked me if I could write an op-ed about something I was covering, some scandal. And I go to my boss, he threw me out of his office. He goes, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "The opinion is here. This is the news page." I think we need to kind of get back to that. That doesn't mean you can't have opinions, but it needs to be a strict separation. And that doesn't mean you can't have a POV either, but you need to maintain some semblance of difference between the two, because this news page is really, this is the value added that people need. They need to know, when I get up in the morning, am I going to be in traffic? Am I going to be, is crime rising so much that I might be shot as I go to work, which was happening in New York for a while. People were getting thrown in front of subways. Those stories had a huge impact when the New York Post covered that, by the way. They were on the forefront of that because it forced the police to forced Mayor Adams to increase the police force in the subways. I mean, that's where journalism matters. I think, when I break a big story about a stock, when my producer breaks a big story about crypto, that adds value because it gives you an insight into what you might do with your money. People want that information, okay? we have to go back to adding that type of value.
Does the media need more intellectual diversity? Does it need more conservatives?
It needs, my knee-jerk reaction is yes, just so you know. But, I think it's more than that. It needs, people call it fair and to be skeptical of everything. Yes, right now, it could use a lot more journal. The problem with the media right now, in terms of politics, is that the pool of kids that I see that go into it are literally, from a pool of schools that are indoctrinating, students into, wokeism, so to speak. I mean, think about where you get most of your journalists. Where do they come from? They come from the elite colleges that are, including my former college, who are being brainwashed that America is a horrible place, and they need to use journalism as a tool to correct that horrible place in a progressive way. That is not where we should be going, because, America is a horrible place. It's a great place. There are horrible people on the left. There's horrible people on the right. There are people that want to lie to you. There's a border crisis, by the way, which was, no offense to anybody that's left-wing out there, created by a progressive politician named Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump did a stupid thing on January 6th. I can say that Donald Trump was great on the economy. I should be able to say Donald Trump was great for this economy, which I give him a B+, actually, to be honest with you, and horrible on January 6th. Horrible what he did. How he, I believe, incited a riot. I could also say that one day of rioting, one horrible day where people stormed the Capitol, which is horrible, is not as bad as 3 years or 2 years of Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests that destroyed inner cities, that created crime, that led to defunding the police. It led to stupid things that the progressive left pushed on this country. I should be able to say both of those things, and I do. Trust me on this. I wrote a column the other day, this is funny, that said Kamala Harris is the first DEI, could be the first DEI president. She was picked largely because of intersectionality as Joe Biden's running mate, and she didn't really have to, earn it. She's picked now. They didn't dump her, when Biden dropped out because of intersectionality. I thought it was pretty much on solid ground. Gavin Newsom didn't like it, and he said my column was racism. Okay. The next week, I said Donald Trump was horrible on spending. Horrible. He actually set the seeds for inflation in many ways, because Trump kept spending and spending and spending, even when COVID was looking like it was waning. And, I don't want to turn this into an economic session, but you get the point. I was very critical, and I did it on Fox News in a debate with Andy Puzner, who's was a Trump administration official. Trump then tweeted out, called me Charlie Never Trumper Gasparino. Got his ass handed to him by Andy Puzner. I mean, he tweeted out about me. So, I should be able to piss off both sides. And that's kind of what I try to do. And let me say try. I don't try to go out of my way to piss off people. But I think if you do your job, you will piss off both sides.
I have two more questions. At the College Fix, we're trying every day to break campus news and launch media careers. We're recruiting young people, training them up, and encouraging them into the profession. Is this the kind of thing a college student should try and think about doing?
I don't want to say no, but be prepared for a rough business. We need more. We need more heterodox views in journalism. Heterodox to journalism. Not heterodox, by the way, to 90% of the people in America who are saying, who are moderate to right of center, who just, don't want to be proselytized every day, by media. So we need people that infuse that, that are part of that. That's good for society, because journalism is a huge part of society. It's just a rough business right now. I think you need to be aware that, there are challenges here. There are more people looking for jobs than jobs available. The business model is changing. And before we settle out, and I can't tell you when that settling out will be, it's a tough road. And But one reason why I tell, just so you know, everybody that worked for me got jobs. They're doing very well. You know, one of my producers went to Bloomberg. She started her own financial newsletter and made millions, okay? Another one of my producers is now one of the top reporters at the New York Post. She's doing very well. She does TV. Others are, you know, at CNBC, and one is a field producer here who's one of the better ones. Everybody does well, I think, because I tell them to be conversant in all forms of journalism. So you will get a job if you go through my boot camp. Trust me on this. But make no mistake, it's a tough business.
There are a lot of tough businesses.
Yeah.
There are a lot of businesses that are going through transitions, disruptions. There are a lot of businesses where there are more people seeking jobs than there are jobs. But why journalism? What is the case, this last question then, what is the case for journalism? What's your pep talk for wanting to go into it? Why is it fun, and why is it a career a young person should think about?
And why am I still here? Because if I could,
why are you still doing it?
Okay, because it's a fun job. If you get good at it, you will make a difference. Okay, you will make a difference in society. You will give, if you do it right, if you provide people with information that they need. I'm not talking about your opinion all the time. If you understand the craft, it is a craft, right? I've written 6 books, okay? I couldn't have written my first book if I didn't start at a newspaper called The Community Current, I believe it was called, in Peekskill, New York, and, you know, interview cops about crime in downtown Peekskill, New York. I couldn't have done that. You have to you have to develop yourself. You know, you have to be willing. There's a little bit of wax on, wax off here. You know, remember that from Mr. Miyagi. You have to learn the basics, really have the basics drilled down. And if you start at a job where you have people you're working for that aren't willing to teach you the basics, then find another job. I mean, you really have to learn how to write that straight news story. You need to know how to figure out how to write that narrative feature in an unbiased way. You need to have an attitude where you will take on anybody. You know, you're not there to promote a political position or a business position. You're there to essentially break news. Your boss is the guy that signs your paycheck, but it's also the person on the other side. That's who you're serving. You're serving the public. I think if you keep that in mind and work at the craft, it's highly rewarding. I can't tell you how rewarding it was for me, and I'm 62 and I've been there before, to be in a bookstore in northern Connecticut with my wife and see my book out there. I mean, first I'm looking around, and my wife is like, "You think they have it here?" I said, "Well, this is an independent bookstore. Do they really care about conservative books? I don't know." You know, usually conservative books sell online, and you know, the independent bookstores is rough for and by the way, I don't consider this a conservative book, but I can see where it might be labeled as that. So we look, and there it is, front and center in the politics area of this little bookstore, cute little bookstore in Madison, Connecticut, and I almost started crying. It was it meant so much to me. It was so fulfilling. I think that, in little ways, happened to me throughout my career. When I got my first story in Newsweek, in Newsday, when I broke my first scoop for Newsday, when I got my first page 1 leader in the Wall Street Journal. It was, you know, I actually still have the plate for my first story at the Wall Street Journal. When I wrote my first book, these are all moments, and you know, you take pride in this because you've accomplished something. And I think that's the payoff. And if you do it well, you will make a few bucks. Trust me on this. It used to be a profession that everybody said, "Oh, you're not going to make any money." That's one reason my father hated journalists. They don't make any money and they destroy the world. Right? My dad was very, trust me, when you grow up poor, we grew up very working class, you know, money was a big thing. But there is a fulfilling aspect of it, and you will make money if you do this business right. People that are good at this business have jobs, and they pay the rent. More than that, they do very well. Even though the pie is getting smaller and smaller, and it's morphing into something different. Listen, look at it this way. Podcasts. Not every podcast hits it out of the park, but a lot of podcasts do. And these are people that are just giving you information, and they're doing pretty well, and they're not working for anybody. I mean, that is a potential model for the future. How do you get to be a podcaster? I think the transition to that really starts just with straight journalism, understanding news, understanding how to present news, understanding how to present it right. And then you do add value that way, where you can add value in the medium that this evolves into, which, again, I can't tell you where it's going.
Charlie Gasparino, thanks so much. This was great.
Thank you.
Hello again, John Miller here. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe. Also, visit our website at The College Fix. If you're a student and you'd like to join The College Fix and try out journalism, find the button on our homepage and an editor will contact you. We got more videos coming. Please stay tuned.